The game was an unmarked disc, not even a color, just a plain piece of plastic, yet I was horrified when I saw it in my dream. I popped up in the middle of the night, and there was no way I was going to be able to go back to sleep. I laid in my bed and thought about why that PlayStation game was so terrifying to me. The game appeared at Corey's house when I was 13. He had moved down the street from me shortly before, and I made fast friends with him because he always had all of the best games. Corey's dad worked for an electronics distributor, so he got the games early. Corey was waiting for me when I got home from the school bus one day. His dad had gotten a crazy new game from Japan no one else would ever have. He had spent the day playing it over and over again. He showed me the unmarked disc before he put it in the PlayStation. The game had no opening credits or menu. It just went straight into the gameplay, spitting you into a point-of-view game in a murky building which seemed like an army base. I'm hesitant to describe the game too much. 1, because I don't remember it perfectly because of the way it shredded my brain. 2, because I don't want to pass on any of the trauma the game gave me to anyone else. From what I remember, the game was relatively unfinished, and that made it more eerie. The monsters were just blank outlines without faces which would kill you. The music was low and humming and barely audible. Everything was dark. The controls were jerky. Yet the game was incredibly addicting. I played it over and over and over again until my parents made me come home. I stayed up almost all night thinking about the game. When I did sleep, I felt like I was just in the game in my head. Corey wasn't at school the next day again. I didn't think anything of it until I walked out of class at the end of the day and saw local news television trucks parked out front. I heard what they were talking about, interviewing students and parents. An unnamed student had killed himself and his family that day at their home. I found out it was Corey on the bus ride home. Very few details came out. All I ever found out was Corey took the dad's shotgun and shot both parents and his older sister all in bed, all still sleeping. I didn't want to know much more. I stopped playing video games for a while. Yet, the game wouldn't get out of my head. I just kept wanting to play it. I eventually went to the video game store at the mall. It was lorded over by a man named Morton, obese, in his 20s, shoulder-length hair and an air of odd arrogance. He made video game shopping at a suburban town in Ohio feel like you were trying to buy records in Brooklyn. I approached Morton with fear. He was a hulking figure to my 13-year-old self, and he had his own little empire at the only game store in town. "I'm looking for a game. My friend had it, but I can't find it," I started in. "Ta-ta-ta today, Junior," Morton mocked me with a line from Billy Madison. The other guys in the store chuckled, turning my face to beet red. "Have you ever heard about an unmarked PlayStation game from Japan?" I asked. Everyone about Morton changed. He looked around the space to see if anyone was still listening. Then he motioned me closer and spoke quieter. "Where did you see that game?" he asked. Now it was my turn to get closer and talk quietly. I explained it was Corey and who he was and what he did. Morton looked even more interested and stressed out. He took me to a back room. Dark, the only light coming from an arcade machine in the back and a lit cigarette dangling from the teenage lips of another kid. I knew the kid. His name was Nat. He was 15 and was known in the area as a video game prodigy. He had won just about any tournament for any game ever held in several counties, and he had an interesting style. He had long hair at a time when everyone had short. He wore tight clothes at a time when everyone wore baggy, and there were rumors he did professional video game testing in California during school breaks. Nat, hanging out in the secret back room of the video game store, was very on brand. Morton had me sit down at a table as he started demolishing fun-sized candy bars while he told me the backstory of the video game from Japan. The game wasn't from Japan. He wasn't sure where that mythology came from. The game was very much from the United States. It was created by the United States government. When school shootings started becoming a thing, there was a panic about video games, specifically first-person shooter games being the cause. The Central Intelligence Agency's solution was to work with a video company to create a first-person shooter game to release and hype up, but to subliminally program as to control the player's mind and steer them to non-violent thoughts. "How do you know all this?" I asked Morton. "The game is a real thing," Nat said, while never stopping banging away at the latest version of Mortal Kombat on the machine in the corner. I let Morton go on. Nat was the ultimate authority to me. His girlfriend, Callan, was my first love, even though she didn't know who I was. She was a year ahead of me in school, and I didn't even know how she existed. But back to the game. The game didn't keep kids from being violent. Video games couldn't fucking do that. But something they programmed in the game destroyed the kids who tested it. They couldn't focus on anything else, and it terrorized their minds, making them think monsters were coming to kill them, basically making them severely schizophrenic. The worst part was something in the game seemed to make kids really want to share it. All of the test kids snuck the game out and made copies of it. Unless someone was skilled enough to make it through the game and beat it, the game seemed to ruin their brains and their lives, Morton explained, before saying he was out of information. "Have you played the game?" Morton asked me. I affirmed. "Where is the game now?" Morton asked. I explained I had no idea. I assumed it was with Corey's family and their stuff. No way I could get access to it. At that point, Morton explained that he wished me luck, but he could offer me no help. "Do you know who has ever beaten the game?" I asked Morton, as I could feel his body energy beg me to leave. "I have." Nat's voice rose up from the corner of the room. Nat left the room before I could ask any more questions. The game permeated my brain. All I wanted to do was play it, even though I had no way to. I would see the monsters hiding in the shadows of my parents' house, and I'd stop, wait for them to jump out and attack me. I heard that terribly ominous musical score of the game in the back of my mind all the time. If I slept, all I dreamed about was the game, and getting killed in the game, and it all felt real. This went on for a couple of days, and kept getting stronger and stronger. I had to keep playing the game. I lost control. I got out of bed in the middle of the night and snuck out my bedroom window. I made it to Corey's house in a flash. There was no police tape or anything you'd expect in a movie. It was just there, the way it always was. I went to the back of the house, where I knew there was a door that went directly into the basement where Corey's gaming setup was. I took the long shot that it was left unlocked. Now, this all might sound crazy, but as a severe drug addict for a good chunk of my life, trust me that my desire to play that game that night was stronger than any desire to ever do drugs. That's how intoxicating and addicting it was. Nothing was going to stop me. The door was unlocked, and if you want to doubt that small-town cops 25 years ago were that lazy, try me. I got into the basement. The house was cold, dark and empty, but Corey's PlayStation was still set up right there in the basement. I checked the disc inside. It was the game. I turned on the PlayStation and the game came to life. I started playing. My feet felt like they were welded to the floor. My fingers superglued to the controller. My eyes couldn't leave the screen. There was no getting away from the game. I played for I have no idea how long. I can't remember anything until I was standing in that dark basement, playing the game, and I felt strong hands wrap around the back of my neck. Then a powerful force pushed me to the ground. I was on the ground, and I looked up and saw endless shadows filling the room around me. Dark and faceless. They looked just like the monsters in the game. The monsters were moving in on me. They were no longer in the game. They were no longer in my head. They were now living and breathing with me and dangerous. And they were going to be on me very soon, and the power they radiated at me communicated to me that I wasn't going to last long against them. I also got a powerful sense of something they wanted me to do. They were telling me to go to school the next day. They were telling me where my dad kept his gun. I was losing myself in their messages. Then all of these feelings started to fade. Then the television cut out. The game no longer broadcasting. Someone else was in the room. Not just me and the monsters. They were dressed in all black. I couldn't make out anything identifiable about them other than they were human like me, and they were pushing away the monsters, and they took my hand. They got me out of the house. Then they disappeared. I looked back into the basement of Corey's house. There was nothing but darkness inside. But then I saw a blue light come to life inside the basement room. The game had come back on again, and it was calling me back inside with its siren song. I was ready to go back in, taking my first steps that way, when someone grabbed me from behind and pulled me away. "Go the fuck home. I won't help you from here." They let me go and were gone in the night. I walked home. I made it out that night, but the thirst for and the haunting of my brain by the game didn't go away. It never went away. I felt more and more like I was trapped in that awful, endless game throughout my life. Life did not go well, especially after I figured out the only way to soothe the endless mind terror of the game was to drown it in as much alcohol and drugs as I could until I blacked out and passed out. This behavior wiped out all my teenage years. The only thing that stopped it was getting myself thrown in prison in my 20s and getting years to dry out. Then I got spit put in my 30s. Nowhere to go. Totally unprepared for life. I went back to my hometown. That was about the only option I had. I walked around the town endlessly and aimlessly. Being on the move tended to push away the monsters in my head, and yes, they were still stalking me all these years later. I had never broken the chain of mental terror of the game. I was shocked to see the video game stores still open at the edge of town. There was no choice but to go in. I was further shocked to find the layout almost exactly the same, sans Morton. Instead, a tall man about my age was behind the counter, long, greasy hair, playing a game on a personal computer. He didn't acknowledge me in the slightest. I walked the racks of games, always one eye on the man behind the counter. I knew him. It was definitely Nat, just aged like me, some white hair in a sad attempt at a beard, some wrinkles on his forehead. Nat was giving off the energy and posture of someone who was doing everything he could to avoid being talked to. I wasn't going to let it slide this time. I called him by his name. He seemed shocked. He still barely acknowledged me. The only information he would give me was that Morton died years earlier and handed the shop down to him. No, it felt like he was going to slip away from helping me again until I mentioned a name which caught his ear. Kaylin. Nat finally stopped playing the game and made eye contact. What did I know about Kaylin? Not much. She was just my out-of-my-league childhood crush from growing up, and I knew he was with her. Nat went back to ignoring me, until I brought up the game, from Japan. This caught his attention again. "What was your experience with the game?" "I ruined my life," I answered. Nat finally let down his wall of frigid cold cool. He looked at me with moisture in his eyes. "Mine too," Nat muttered. It felt terrible to see Nat so broken. He was like this magical cool ahead of his time, gamer badass when we were growing up, and now he looked like an underfed and beaten dog. I could sense a particular sadness ever since I mentioned Kaylin. "Where is Kaylin?" I asked. "At home." Nat dropped a big revelation like it was nothing. "Morton said you could beat the game, though. Didn't that solve the problem?" I asked. Nat didn't answer, but I felt no hope radiate out of him. "So how are you getting through all this, then?" I asked. "It's just a struggle every day," Nat explained. "Do you want it to be that way forever?" I asked. Nat looked up at me, finally, with some life in his eyes. Nat had buried his copy of the game underneath an abandoned cabin out in the woods behind his parents' house. He took me out there and told the true story of the game as we ventured to it. Yes, Nat had beaten the game. One time, and it almost killed him. He explained the game seemed to connect more and more with you the longer you played it, and you could feel it poisoning your blood and mind as you played. Beating it almost killed him. He didn't beat it for himself, though. He beat it for Kaylin. She had found the game at his house and played it, driving herself mad, to the point it almost killed her. He had her hold the controller with him and helped her, while not looking at the screen as much as he could so she would be the one processing beating the game. But he beat the game and saved her the best he could. She was tired and damaged afterward, but she said the game didn't permeate her mind and life the way it did Nat's after that. It helped them stay together. They went from first loves to life partners and had stayed strong together over the years. Nat kept trying to beat the game on his own, and he never could. And each time he tried, he lost a little more of himself, and let a little more of the game into his psyche. He eventually gave up. He found that he could manage it with copious amounts of marijuana and keeping his life simple. He also found happiness in Kaylin being able to live her life, though she had always seemed tired from experiencing the game all those years before, like it was a parasite that would never truly let her go. We found the game. The sight of that blank disc took my breath away. We thought that we would have a better chance if we tried it together. We fired up the game, and our nerves filled the room in his little apartment. Going back into the game for the first time in decades was harrowing. I couldn't do anything else, couldn't move outside of controlling the game. I started to sweat. The game was even harder than I remembered. It was so dark you could barely see. The monsters seemed to be hiding around every corner, and they'd launch at you the second they saw you and take you out. Nat and I took turns, and neither of us could survive for more than a few minutes. We just kept dying, and it seemed to take the energy, life and wind out of us each time. The two of us sat down after a few deaths. The two of us both knew we were starting to swiftly wither away. We were older and more weathered. The game was taking more of a toll on our bodies and minds. I was starting to get lightheaded after losing my life in the game for what must have been 50 times. It was getting late into the night and I could hardly stay awake, yet I kept playing on. I have no idea when I fell asleep or passed out. All I knew was that I woke up at some point in the middle of the night and could see Nat still playing, the remote in his hand. But him on the ground on one knee, his face glued to the television. Nat looked terrible. His face was bright red. His body was leaned forward like he had a terrible pain in his stomach and he was gasping for air. He looked like he was being strangled. I looked closer at the screen and saw one of the faceless monsters on the screen. I could see its arms reaching out in the point of view. The monster was choking out Nat. I rushed to Nat and reached for the controller. I felt something push me backward, full on knocking me over. I felt a cold, strong grasp around my neck as I laid on the ground. I tried to fight back and push the energy off me, but couldn't. It was far too strong. The oxygen started to no longer get to my brain. My vision started to get foggy. I felt like my entire body got heavy, like I could no longer move it. Then, darkness. I woke up on the floor, breathless, pained, and confused. I saw a familiar face towering above me, but horribly aged. I didn't recognize him at first, and then it came into focus. It was Morton. He was old and looked like shit, but there was no denying it was him. There was no way I could mistake that disapproving scowl. The urge to say something to Morton came over me. He held a finger to his lips. Silence. I obeyed. Morton's eyes went back to the screen, and I looked him over again. He had the PlayStation remote in his hand. He had concentration on his face. His legs wobbled, weak, as if he was struggling to keep his balance. He certainly looked like he was in a fight. And he was struggling and fighting. I looked at the screen, and Morton was taking on an entire room full of the monsters. I had never made it as far in the game as Morton appeared to have made it. He was outside. I had never been there. He also appeared to be doing a good job at it. I felt myself feel like I was wrapped in a bear hug. I looked up at the screen and saw the monsters overtaking Morton. I started to feel my body crunch. It felt like I was getting rolled up into a 1,000-pound rug. I could feel my body telling me I didn't have much time left. I looked next to me and saw Nat on the floor as well, not looking good at all. The black was returning to my senses. I couldn't hold out under this squeezing for much longer. I started to scream. Nat screamed. Morton grumbled and flexed, playing the game as hard as he could. I felt something else coming over me, over the pain and the torture and the wasted life. I felt someone fighting for me. I felt Morton fighting for me. The television screen started to shake. I saw on the screen it looked like Morton was going to work on one final monster, a large one, and it was backpedaling. I felt the squeezing feeling on me start to let go. I could breathe again. I felt like I could get up. I watched the monster explode on the screen above me. I then watched the glass of the television explode, showering the three of us with sparks and dark glass. There was a moment of silence with an absence of movement. Then the world started to come back to me. I was alive, and I felt significantly better. Then Morton collapsed onto the floor between Nat and me. Morton had terminal cancer. He hadn't actually died yet. He confided in Nat when he got sick and disappeared and told Nat to tell everyone that he simply died. But the truth was, he just gave up the store, moved away, and tried to do treatment in peace. Nat reached out to him when we were failing at the game. Morton was the next best video gamer that he knew and wanted to see if he could help. Nat and I had failed and passed out by the time Morton arrived. Morton knew it would kill him much sooner if he tried and beat the game, but he gave it a go anyway. And he saved both our lives. We owed him everything. Nat and I went to Morton's hospital room. He wouldn't talk to us or let us look at him. He would only communicate by a whiteboard, which he would write answers to our verbal questions on and hand it around a curtain next to his bed. Morton explained he could go at any minute and that he needed some help from us. He also, very much in his fashion, revealed something I never thought about. Morton showed us the whiteboard. It read, "This wasn't the first time I did this for you." Either smiley face. It clicked with me as soon as I saw his writing on the whiteboard. I could see that dark figure standing over me that night at Corey's house when someone saved me from the monsters in the game. Morton must have been keeping an eye on me or Corey's house and came to save me, but kept himself hidden. Morton quickly changed the conversation on his whiteboard and handed us a list, an Excel sheet printed out, with a note explaining these were the copies of the dreaded game which was still out there. He finished by saying he had enough energy for one last question. Would we go out and try to track down the copies of the game and destroy them? Nicole was the best sex I ever had. So good it ruined just about any woman I ever had after. So imagine my glee when Nicole showed up at my door late one night, unannounced. I'll spare you the details and let you know it was just as good as I always remembered. Nicole never came back again. I tried to text and call her and track her down on social media, yet got nothing. I assumed maybe she was married and it was just a one-off fling she had to get out of her system or something. I wasn't complaining. Nicole may have been the best sex of my life, but Becca was the love of my life. The only thing was I apparently wasn't hers. I had bought the ring to propose to Becca and everything. I was just waiting for her birthday. Then I came home and she had moved all of her stuff out. She was gone. The uncoupling was slow and steady. Her officially breaking up with me, moving out. Then came the not returning texts or calls. Then the unfriending and unfollowing. Then she was basically gone. A few years went by. I moved on, but sadness always lingered. I never wanted to lose Becca. I never found anyone to replace her. Nothing ever felt right. I had just drifted apart from another semi-relationship when Becca appeared again. Like Nicole, she just showed up at my house one night. Becca wasn't Nicole. We didn't have an all-night sex marathon, and then she crept away. We talked. We caught up until the sun rose. I was happy again. I didn't press her for more than that night. I didn't want to scare her. She said she had recently broken up with a long-term boyfriend. She needed time. I was happy to oblige. It started inconsistently. Becca would text me and then come over from time to time. Then it started to progress. Becca came over every night. I fell in love again. Yet, something didn't feel right. Becca, being an impromptu night owl, was completely out of character. She also wouldn't let me in too deep. Wouldn't tell me almost anything about her life. She also wouldn't accept my follow request on Instagram. It was extra frustrating, given it looked like who I assumed was her ex was in her profile photo. I confronted Becca on it and she started to backpedal. I regretted it. She got defensive and left first thing in the morning. Then she stopped communicating with me. I was alone and depressed again, but it didn't feel like it. I started to get scared in my own house. The first thing I found odd was the behavior of my heating system. I kept it rather low, even in the cold winter since it was so expensive. Every time I went by the thermostat, though, it was cranked up. I would turn it down, and then I would feel the heat kick right back on and find the temperature turned back up. There was no way of stopping it. I worked at home and didn't have a rather robust social life, and was home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So this was a major battle. I was trying to fix the thermometer when I got a piece of news which made my body go cold, despite the heat being cranked to 79 degrees. My friend called me and shared a shocking piece of news with me. He ran into one of Nicole's friends he knew from when Nicole and I were dating. Nicole's friend let my friend know something horrible and shocking. Nicole had died in a car crash. My heart shattered. It was the worst news I had ever received, even if Nicole had ghosted me a couple months before. I was numb. That numbness switched to horror when my friend shared another detail. Nicole had died 2 years ago. I had him clarify. He confirmed. Nicole had died 2 years before. I Googled it and found an obituary. I immediately didn't feel safe in my house. Right on cue. I felt the heat turn on and looked at the thermometer. I watched the temperature start to climb right before my eyes. I left the house. I wanted to confirm that I still lived in the real world. I left the house so rarely I sometimes wondered if I did or not. I could confirm. I was very much in the world. I was alive. Nicole was not. Yet she had shown up at my house. My next mission was to confirm if Becca was alive or dead. She hadn't replied to me in years, so I reached out to her sister and got her to respond, explaining my desperation given the situation with Nicole and her death. Becca's sister explained she was very much alive. She had just gotten married and moved to Canada with her husband. She was very much not spending a bunch of time at my house recently. My brain was destroyed, but I was trying to make sense of things as I sat in my house, suddenly feeling like something horrible was breathing all around me. Someone was at the door, knocking softly. I didn't want to answer it. I knew nothing good could come from it. I stayed frozen. Another knock. I had to do something. I couldn't hide. I went to the door. I could recognize her just from the silhouette. I could smell her familiar scent of gardenia perfume through the door. My mom was outside. My mom had died 5 years before. I opened the door and saw her standing there in her typical posture, smiling, happy, looking full of life. I didn't know what to do. I knew whatever was standing there wasn't my mom. I also knew I couldn't stand to close the door on her. I looked into her eyes for a few seconds. "It's so good to see you," my mom's familiar warm voice said just before I shut the door. I couldn't face it. I knew what was out there wasn't my mom. I knew whatever was out there was either in my head or it was something that was trying to do me harm. I tried to maintain this thought while I listened to my mom cry on the other side of the door and beg me to let her in. The situation left me with only one option. No. There was no way to logistically explain what happened, so I could no longer hold skepticism. I briefly dated a woman named Penny about a year before. I really liked Penny, despite her being quite odd. She had a fun and genuine affect, and she looked like a happier version of Aubrey Plaza. The morning after the first time Penny stayed over, she left before sunrise. She made me go out to her car with her. She told me I needed to move out of my house if we were going to keep dating. There was something evil in the house she could feel, and it was growing, and she couldn't be near it. I also should not be near it. I asked if she was serious a few times, and she doubled down. I laughed it off and we parted ways. She texted me about it that night. I never texted her back. Eventually I deleted her number. Thankfully I still had her number in Hinge. I got her on the phone. Penny listened to me explain what had just happened. Penny explained she wouldn't go into my house until the next sunrise. I had to make it through the night on my own until then. I should be able to... It sounded to her like I had a serious problem, but it wasn't potentially fatal yet. Potentially fatal. What the hell had I gotten myself into? Penny told me to sit tight. Turn off all the lights. Don't use any electronics. Draw no attention to myself. Try to sleep or something. That was all perfectly easy. I put myself onto the couch in the living room, threw a blanket over myself and popped a sleeping pill. I had somehow fallen asleep, at least for a while. I woke up still in the darkness. No idea what time it was. The sleeping pill was still very much in my blood. I was impossibly sluggish. I couldn't get up off the couch. What I could do was see that the front door of my house was ajar, and I could smell that perfume scent of gardenias in the air. I felt my mom in the house. Why had Penny told me to not leave the house? She hadn't really explained. Why was I listening to Penny again? Wasn't the best idea to just flee the house? Isn't that what you always scream at the characters in horror movies as they get themselves killed or further haunted? I heard someone move behind me. Oh shit. I was finally able to get off the couch and jumped up, tensed myself up, ready to fight. "You really need to lock your door," Penny quipped as my senses took her in. How did I get this ghost? What was it? The questions spilled out of me to Penny. Everyone tries to complicate ghosts, like there's always some backstory or they latch onto you because it's someone you knew or something. The truth is, it's just a glitch in the afterlife system. Some get lost and hang around. They try to cling to any life they can find and hang on, so if you get stuck with one, that's it. Penny explained. I needed more. Why me? It's totally indiscriminate. It's like a virus. Like your water heater guy could have left it in here, the pizza guy could have brought it. Usually, if you're mentally healthy enough, you don't notice them and they wilt and go away. They live on attention. Clearly, you're not clear of mind. That's why I told you to stay home. We don't need you out there running around, spreading it around, Penny answered. But it looked and acted like people in my life. My exes. My mom. They evolved that to show up as people you know and love so you would keep them around. If you're healthy enough, it doesn't present that way, and the only way to beat it is to get better, which you seem to struggle with doing. It talks to you. It interacts with you. It drives you crazy. What do you think happened to all those homeless people out on the street screaming at nothing? So the house isn't haunted? It's only people that matter? No, that whole "it's the person that's haunted, not the house" is just an excuse made up by writers to keep the family in the house in movies and books and stuff. How do I get better? Just you gotta let the thing in and be stronger than it. Don't give in. You never should have fucked that wild ex when she showed up. You knew she was bad news and probably could have given you a sexually transmitted disease or got pregnant. You knew the ex you liked wasn't real. Deep down. You knew she wouldn't just show up unannounced and want you again, but you let it in. So what do? We don't do it. You do it. I'm leaving, and you just have to fight through it and not let this thing take you down. It will eventually fade. Okay, all good, it can't kill me. Penny hesitated. I didn't like that. Right? You think ghosts leave fingerprints? Deoxyribonucleic acid? You hear of someone dropping dead randomly of a heart attack while otherwise healthy? Fall in the shower? Someone who doesn't seem depressed committing suicide? They mess you up into doing it. This information didn't sit well. Neither did Penny leaving, despite her encouragement that I could get through it, along with the reminder that I couldn't leave the house or interact with anyone. Wait, I ran out and caught Penny before she drove away, clearly bothering her, but I had to ask her the question. Don't you have it now? The ghost? Kind of like a virus. Once you get through one, you're immune, Penny said and drove off. I was on my own. I turned on every light in the house, turned on a bunch of electronics, just like Penny said. I wanted to draw this thing in this time. I sat there numbly watching television and waiting, trying to remember the things that Penny told me. I had to just let it come and ignore it, not give in. I couldn't leave home. It would get fainter and fainter, and I had to just keep pushing through. Don't reach out to her, that would show weakness. Just ride it out. Try to sleep. That's what I did. I went to bed. Then it started. I was lying in bed, and I felt the heat start to crank. I started sweating profusely underneath the blanket I had pulled up over my head. I could feel it there next to me, next to the bed. Then I felt it start to pull on the blanket. It was strong. I was not going to be able to fight it off. I soon found out. I was soon looking at my younger brother, James, who passed away when he was in his early 20s. Always stronger, always more confident. James was a force of nature with no fear, which is why he passed away, thinking he could drink entire bottles of liquor and drive, and not get caught, or drive off a highway and crash his truck. This was the kind of thing James would do growing up. Go into my room and pummel me, pin me, wrestle me, assert his dominance. He started to climb on top of my chest, and I turned away. I laid on my side and just let him keep trying to wrestle me and grab my attention. This virus of a ghost was diabolical. It knew James would rupture my heart, even worse than my mom. I never got to say goodbye to James. He was just gone one Sunday morning when I woke up. My older brother, the one who stood up to anyone who picked on me, reduced to ashes off of Highway 9. He kept chiding me in my ear to try and get me to fight back the way he always would. He took everything in me not to turn around. Then I felt him twist my ear. I felt real searing pain. He cranked it hard a way he never would in real life, reminding me it wasn't really James there torturing me in my bed. Penny had said, like a real virus, it was going to get worse before it got better, and I could see the light. I finally got out of bed and ran to the bathroom. I could finally breathe for a moment and collect myself. Then the lights started to flicker off and on, an annoyance James would love to terrorize me with when we were kids. It took a second, but James started to come back into the picture in the bathroom mirror, drenched in blood, his neck ripped open. The sight of it got me to start crying uncontrollably. I could barely see, my tears were so thick. James started to plead to me, begging me, sounding soft and pathetic and hysterical and scared in a way I never imagined my big, bad, older brother could. Mardi, please, 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 you got to help me. There was nothing I could even do by the looks of it either. He was bleeding out and fast. His blood was splashing all over me. He leaned all his weight on me and I stopped fighting. I let him take me down to the floor. Then he flicked out the lights and I felt myself start to feel like I was suffocating. I woke up in the bathtub, half full with water, and the shower pounding water down on my face, cold and shocking. Penny stood next to the tub looking pained, but relieved that she saw life on my face. It took me a second to realize something else odd. The lighting was dim and murky. It was candlelight. It got you to turn the power out and I can't figure out how to get it back on, Penny explained. I couldn't think of how I would have even done that, especially considering I had just woken up from a blackout. It had you deep. You were almost gone, Penny went on. What happened? I asked Penny. I realized I had to come help you. I also realized it's my fault. I relapsed, Penny said. I had no idea what that all fucking meant. She went home and was greeted by the awful, violent spirit of her abusive dad. His presence gave her a revelation. She wasn't getting creeped out by the spirits in my house that first night she stayed over. She was creeped out because my house really reminded her of her horrible childhood home, where her dad terrorized her. The vulnerability my house kicked up in her had left her open to getting invaded by the virus of new spirits, bad ones. And she had left that energy at my house that first night, and it festered and grew with the darkness and vulnerability inside me. But she would make it right. It was all her fault, and she was falling apart. I heard the grotesque sound of a gristly throat clearing outside the bathroom door. I saw Penny's face drop in a way that made me very, very uneasy. Someone tried the door handle. It rattled, locked. I heard an angry man scream at the door. Open the fucking door right now. Can't it just get right through the door anyway? It's a spirit. Mine did it. I asked Penny. It's what this one wants to do. It wants to get angrier, Penny whispered back. Penny killed the candlelight. Pure, unfiltered darkness reigned again. The angry man kept yelling belligerently and trying the door. He pounded on it, nearly breaking the thick wood. I had been through a lot. My body felt ravaged. I had no idea if I was going to be able to sustain whatever pissed-off evil was going to come through that door very soon. I knew one thing, though. I was going to fight for Penny. I wasn't going to let this poor woman suffer anymore, even if she was supposed to be my Sherpa, and how she was the one crying scared. I felt Penny run away from me. She was out the bathroom door because I couldn't stop her. I could hear a struggle out there. I went out into the living room. No one was there. The front door was wide open. I watched Penny's shitty car drive off down the street. Penny wouldn't reply to my texts, calls, or social media requests. I wasn't sure if she was alive or dead. I never felt or saw odd things in my house anymore, though. I felt truly alone again for the first time in a long time, in a good and a bad way. The solitude allowed me to reflect on everything with Penny. and what she said, the way the ghosts appeared and presented themselves, how there were good and bad spirits. I wondered if Penny was just one of them all along, a good one. I let it go and happily went on with my life, just more thankful. I dated again. I got a girlfriend. Said girlfriend and I went to a farmer's market one day. I drifted away as she got lost in some jewelry stand or something I wasn't interested in. I wandered by a candle booth. The curly hair of the woman manning it caught my eye. It was Penny, undoubtedly. My eyes lingered on her as I walked past. She never noticed me. That was fine with me. I kept walking. I couldn't believe we actually went to Mardi Gras for John's bachelor party. It was one of those ideas I thought everyone would always talk about being great, but then realized it would be too expensive and difficult, especially for a bunch of men now in their 30s. Like every bachelor party trip I had ever been on. It was multiple days when it should have just been one when you reached our age. Yet, we were in New Orleans for 4 days and nights, and I was fucked, having gotten blackout drunk the first night of the trip. I knew I was going to be dehydrated with simmering bubble guts the rest of the fucking time. I had lived in the metropolitan area of Los Angeles for years, yet having grown up in the woods at the foothills of the mountains in northwest Washington, all of my friends from growing up were a little country and wild. I told my friends in Los Angeles before I left that going on a bachelor party trip with them was like going to Vietnam. I was saddled with Larry sitting the second night of the trip. Larry sitting referred to having the responsibility of watching our friend Larry, the craziest of the group, for the night. Larry was one of those short, chubby, red-headed and goateed country guys who seemed to live for always driving everyone crazy. I genuinely didn't even like Larry. He was crass, annoying, and not genuine. I only tolerated him because he was the groom and my best friend, John's younger brother. I followed Larry around the bar on the second night of the trip, the night before Fat Tuesday, trying my best to keep him out of trouble. Larry latched onto the only woman who would give him the time of day and accept a drink from him. She entertained his antics for a little while, but clearly eventually got bothered and slipped out of the bar. I did everything I could to stop Larry, but he followed her out of the bar and into the night. Fucking Larry! I pursued him all the way out to the last street before the end of the French Quarter, before I finally caught him. "Why do you hate me?" The pathetic words dribbled out of Larry's fat lips as I spun him around on the sidewalk that was a lot darker than the Bourbon Street one we had left behind. I suddenly felt uncomfortable. The world of the city we had walked into was a lot different than that of the touristy area. I pleaded with Larry to go back to the bar with me and the guys. "There she is!" Larry blurted out and then ran across the street before I could do anything. I watched in horror as Larry made it across the street and disappeared into the entrance of a cemetery. If you Google New Orleans Cemetery, you'll see what I followed Larry into, an endless farm of elaborate soaring gravestones and mini mausoleums. It would have been a stunning sight had I not been so overcome with anger about Larry. I was almost to Larry again when my worst nightmare came true. He had found one of those rental electric scooters and took off on it. The drunken idiot made it about 10 feet before he crashed head right into a gravestone. I watched in horror as he destroyed the thing and crashed on top of a stone tomb. The old stone turned to dust in some spots. Some of it crumbled below his fat frame. Some of it skidded all around. Larry himself scraped across the top of the tomb, shredding up the bottom of his palms and splattering blood across the gravesite. It was a horrible scene. I took it all in as I chewed out Larry for being such a fucking idiot. I was in the middle of realizing we needed to get the fuck out of there when I noticed one thing specific about the grave Larry had destroyed. Resting in the wreckage was an intact decoration lying there, a skeleton with 2 braids dangling from the back of its head. I couldn't take my eyes off of the thing, particularly its eyes, which were painted bright gold. I didn't waste any more time looking at the wreckage. I gathered Larry and got out. Just went back to the hotel and crashed for the night. I wanted to kill Larry at breakfast the next day. He just sat there guzzling Bloody Marys and laughing about what happened the night before. I was far less enthused. I was sure there were security cameras in the cemetery, or someone saw something, and our lives were entirely fucked. John convinced me to shake it off, though. He ordered me a Bloody Mary that, combined with each passing moment where there wasn't fallout from the night before, kept me going and feeling better. I went into the chaos that was the Fat Tuesday fray and got drunk. Whatever the fallout was going to be from the night before was going to happen either way. I might as well have fun. I was having fun until I saw a man at the edge of the crowd, large, face painted like a skeleton, his hair long and tied back in 2 braids, golden eyes which stared at me. The man couldn't have looked more like the piece of the grave Larry destroyed the night before. And he wouldn't stop staring at me. It made me think of Larry. Where was he? I hadn't seen him in an hour at least. I asked all of the other guys in the group. None of them cared. We had forgotten to designate someone on Larry sitting duty, so he was on his own. Everyone was more distracted by the gorgeous girls one of the guys in the group was talking to. Apparently the girls had a private party thing on a riverboat they were going to, and they definitely weren't hookers, and it definitely wasn't a setup, and we definitely weren't too drunk to determine those kinds of things or not. We got on the boat. It was just like any typical riverboat you would see in Louisiana when we got on. It was when we went inside that things were clearly very different. The inside of the boat I would describe as a speakeasy strip club, de Tulle. There was a quiet bar and good-looking women walking around everywhere. I had no idea what we had just stumbled into, other than that it seemed like a dream bachelor party setting. And things were shockingly low-key. We got some drinks and started talking to people, including good-looking girls, and it all seemed natural. Then again, we were all wasted from starting to hammer drinks at 10 in the morning, and the drinks on the boat were amazing, but clearly incredibly stiff. I was damn near swaying because I was so tired and wasted, though that may have been from the boat as well. I went back to the bar to get a refill when I noticed John slip down a dark hallway with an attractive woman. I didn't judge. Neither did I when I watched the 2 other guys in the group, both married, slip off. Ironically, I was the only one in the group who wasn't married or engaged, yet I was most content with not trying to find a woman and wanted to be faithful to my girlfriend. I just relaxed at the bar and was glad to be out of the Mardi Gras crowd. Things were going great until I looked to the other side of the room and saw the familiar face of the large man with the skeleton face and the braids and the golden contacts in his eyes. He didn't seem to notice me at first, and I tried to slip outside without him noticing. I wasn't able to. He locked his eyes onto me, and far too quickly everyone else started to leave the room. In an instant, it was just me and the man with the braids. He slowly moved toward and drew a long blade from his trench coat. Simultaneously, my entire body started to turn to jello, and my mind started to race back to the night before, when we were on a ghost tour in the French Quarter. We almost got kicked off of it for being obnoxious 3 times. By we, I mostly just mean Larry. I was the only one paying attention when we were at an exquisite building on Bourbon Street, and the tour guide went into a story about the only church building in the area. He told the tale of a spirit that would lure debaucherous people who went too far and disrespected the city into their control, and then torture them. They would offer these scenarios like from the Saw movies, where you could get out, but you had to solve some kind of challenge to get you out of the room. I was convinced we had fallen into that situation because of Larry destroying the grave. The other guys were all in rooms being tortured, and this ghost of the person whose grave Larry had destroyed had killed him, and now was about to kill me. The braided man was just a few feet from me when I snapped back into reality. The foul stench of death radiated to me as I stood there in the bar area. I could also feel an anger ready to burst out of the braided man as he made those final steps to me. What I don't think the braided man realized was that I wasn't that drunk at that point. I had slowed down, and my mind cleared with him in front of me. I thought about the party poppers Larry had given me at breakfast in my pocket, which he said to shoot at fuckers at Mardi Gras. I listened to Larry for the first time in my life and shot them right in the face of the braided man. It stunned him, and it gave me time to get to the other item Larry had given me the night before when I was sitting him, a hunting knife. He told me the night before, "You never know when you might need it." He must have either bought it in the city or snuck onto the plane. Now I was thankful for Larry's usually annoying generosity and advice. I slipped the knife out and jabbed it up into the braided man's pelvic area upon his arrival. I watched his gold eyes go wide, totally shocked. I felt hot blood spurt out from him and onto my hand as I twisted the knife in him. I whispered into his ear, "Where are my friends?" I watched those gold eyes of the braided man look to a hallway behind me lined with doors. Then I looked back at the braided man. He was gone. I was twisting the knife into nothing, standing in the room by myself. I heard a scream come from where the braided man told me my friends were being tortured. I took a deep breath and did my best to get my brain to keep being brave for the first time ever in my life. I made it to the first door where the screaming was coming from. I could tell it was John. It motivated me to get in there as quickly as possible. Inside the door, I saw John on the ceiling, hanging face down, strapped to the top of the room with white rope. His eyes burned down at me with a pain and fear I had never seen in my entire life. I also saw a small golden crucifix in his hand. He was grating it against the straps, clearly trying to cut his lashings, but not making much progress. I also saw something in front of his head, a fuse, with a very slow flame heading down it, close to John's face. I also noticed right above John's head some packaging, assumedly some kind of explosive. My brain jumped quickly. Larry's knife. I jumped up and started cutting John down. I checked that fuse. It was getting damn close to John when I still had some more to cut. Shit. 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 I started cutting as fast as I could and watched as John frantically used the crucifix as a cutting object. Together we beat the fuse, and John dropped off of the ceiling. John and I ran out of the room and were back in the hallway. John was asking how I knew what was going on. I didn't answer. I just said we had to split up and go into the nearest rooms and get our other friends out as fast as we could. I went into the nearest room and found complete darkness. The door closed behind me before I could do anything, and I could find the door handle. My search for the door was stopped when I heard a familiar voice cry out for help. It was my friend Stephen. He was in pain somewhere in the room. I didn't say anything. I was savvy enough at this point to know not to draw attention to myself and to avoid doing things which could alter the setup Stephen was likely in the midst of. I had a third epiphany related to Larry, though. He had me hold his lighter the night before while he was talking to someone and smoking. I cracked it and could see where I was. That crack of light from the lighter showed that I was in a dark room that seemed to go on forever. There was endless darkness all around me, no signs of walls. The only thing I could see was Stephen in the middle of the room, blindfolded, with his arms tied behind his back. I moved swiftly and reached Stephen, going to work on the lashings on his wrists. Out of the corner of my eye, I immediately saw white walls appear all around us, off in the distance. They moved in on us quickly as I worked on the lashings, almost getting them off and ignoring Stephen repeatedly asking me what was going on. I ignored him and just kept working on the lashings, getting them almost off quickly, but also extremely stressed by how quickly the walls were coming in on us. I did have some relief, though, in spotting where the door was on one of the walls. We at least had a shot to get out. I got the lashings off. I got Stephen's blindfold off just in time for us to see the walls about 10 feet away from us on each side and slowly moving in on us. I grabbed Stephen's hand and rushed him for the door. It was. We spilled back out into the hallway. We ran right into John and my other friend, Darren, both of whom were covered from head to toe in blood. "Don't ask!" John yelled. John ran for the exit to the outside of the boat and we all followed. We quickly found night had fallen, and we were driving by the dock we boarded on at the banks of the French Quarter. Based on how fast the boat was going, we weren't stopping at that dock. We only had one choice, and John led the way again. He climbed up onto the railing of the boat and jumped off. The rest of us followed suit. I made it to the shore. John and the others were there, all looking back at the river. We all looked in amazement as we didn't see any boats on the water. The four of us started to try and make sense of what happened as we walked back toward the hotel, and I explained the grave situation with the other guys. We discussed Larry. We were sure he had to have been killed at some point. We were very worried that while we escaped the situation we were in, it wouldn't be the end of it. But I had an idea. We went and found the ghost tour guide from the night before. I explained to the guide what happened. He had a solution. I took out a ton of cash, wrote a note, put it in an envelope with instructions to use it to rebuild the wrecked grave, and slipped it underneath the door of the cemetery office. I also lit a candle and paid my respects at the gravesite. The guide couldn't guarantee that would do the trick, but it was the best option we had. We went back to the room drained, defeated, and ready to just go home, but figuring we were instead going to have to go on another odyssey, trying to figure out what happened to Larry. Much to our shock, Larry was in the room, sipping beer when we walked in. "Where the fuck were all of you?" Larry asked as soon as we walked in. None of us answered. We just retreated to wherever we could sleep. I don't know about you, but I had a great time. That was the last thing I heard before I drifted off to sleep. Time has passed, and nothing bad has happened since, which seems connected to that time in New Orleans. I've never gone back, and all of my friends are well, including Larry, who actually somehow got married and had kids. I've kept my side of the bargain, though, maintaining one of the things the ghost tour guide told me to do for years now. In the back of my closet in my bedroom, there's a shrine with a photo of the braided man sculpture I took at the remains of the grave when we went back there. Each night, I go back there and light a candle and say sorry into his golden eyes. It seemed to work so far.